Hey, welcome back, everyone. So here on the road again, and broadcasting in from a hotel room, but good to see you all. Some big stories to go into. We're going to talk about Trump's latest announcement suggesting that he may run for president again in 2024 and may choose the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis as his running mate. He's not confirming it yet. I'll go into this, but he's suggesting it. Would be very interesting. It means that he's dropping Pence. If that happens, at the very least, he's considering not running alongside Pence. Going into that, a few other stories. Also, Joe Biden, $6 trillion in spending, and quite a few other stories as well. And folks, it's good to see you all. Yeah, Hong fan, good to see you. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. Josephine Maljar, good to see you as well. From Ontario, good to see you. Thank you. David G, you are not banned. I see your comments. Lug Puka, you said, Josh, thank you for all you do and for your book list Sunday. I'm doing my best, and thanks for being here as well. And yeah, I hope you all like the book list. I know some books on there are kind of hard to find, but at the very least, you could probably find digital versions. I do hope it was useful, and we'll see about doing more in the future. And folks, that said, let's jump into a few stories for the night. And in the meantime, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Yeah, Bill Fitch, good to see you. Yeah, I'm actually in Texas again right now, on the road again in Texas. All right, folks, first story for the night. Epoch Times reports Trump may run with DeSantis in 2024. It says here, Trump floats 2024 presidential run again, says DeSantis could be potential running mate. Important to note, it's not official, but he's suggesting it. Now it says here, former President Donald Trump said he is floating a 2024 run and could consider Florida Governor Ron DeSantis as a potential running mate. And he said this during an interview with Fox Business. He said, quote, I endorsed Ron, and after I endorsed him, he took off like a rocket ship. He said he's done a great job. He said he's done a great job as governor. I'm saying what I read and what you read. They love that ticket, suggesting running on that ticket. They love that ticket. He said certainly Ron would be considered. He's a great guy. Now, if Trump doesn't run, DeSantis has been considered a potential GOP forerunner for 2024. And so they're saying if Trump chooses not to run in 2024, and he's heavily suggesting he will run, and I'll get into a bit of the details on that in a bit, and also why he's just not announcing it yet. We'll get into that in just a bit. But they're saying if Trump does not run in 2024, that Ron DeSantis would be one of the top candidates for president, at least on the GOP side. But again, Trump's saying he'll probably do it. We'll have to see. Now, the Florida governor has been praised by numerous Republicans for his move to lift all COVID-19 related restrictions in his state in September, making Florida one of the most open states. Trump said this also. He said, I ran twice, and the second time I got 12 million more votes than the first time. Now, the former commander-in-chief, however, did not make a definitive prediction in the interview about running again. If he makes an announcement too early, he said, this is important. If Trump were to announce, say, I'm running for president in 2024, right? If you were to say that, he says, if you were to announce too early, he said it would, quote, have a big impact on fundraising and many other things. He said it's a little bit of a crazy, complex thing. And said, quote, the whole fundraising contribution stuff is ridiculous. The laws are so archaic and stupid, frankly. And so basically Trump's saying that he's probably going to run again in 2024. He says the reason he can't directly say he's running for president again in 2024 is because of some of the complexities around fundraising and some of the laws around this as well. He said these archaic laws, right? He said the fundraising contribution stuff is archaic and stupid, according to him. And now Trump also encouraged Republicans to, quote, have courage and to, quote, keep fighting against the agenda being pushed by the far left right now. Trump said, quote, it's going to happen. He said, we are going to turn it around. They've gone too far. They can't get away with this. We can't allow them to get away with this. They're destroying our country. And he said, quote, "Have courage. It's going to happen. I'm with you." Now, we'll have to see what he ends up doing in the end when it comes, again, to 2022 and 2024. I'll get into that in just a bit. But, folks, first, again, the show's totally demonetized by YouTube. But we do have some sponsors, and tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. With all the turbulence of the economy, the stock market, risks of inflation, i.e. $6 trillion in spending under the Biden administration already, you can consider investing in an asset that's often stable and typically on the incline, and that's gold and silver. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep or into your IRA. To learn more, please check out the link we have in the comments where American Hartford Gold is providing a free 25-page information guide. If you call them now, you can get up to $1,500 of free silver in all qualifying first orders. The phone number for that is 877-260-2764. You can also text Joshua to 65532. So big thanks out to American Hartford Gold. And again, folks, if you're looking for something stable to invest in, gold and silver is typically a good option. My personal recommendation, gold and silver, especially these days. Now, a bit more on Trump and what he's talking about. This is a separate story here, talking what's happening with, again, 2024 and why he's not fully announcing yet, and kind of where things are at with this. Let's go into it. It says here, Trump 2024 announcement would probably not happen until after midterm elections. And so he's suggesting that he's probably, even though he's deeply suggesting he's going to run for president in 2024, even though he's saying that the reason he's really not even announcing it just yet is mainly because of some of the issues with contributors and the way campaigns typically work, right? But he's saying that after 2022, next year, the midterm elections, he will probably announce it. He's saying this. Now, Epoch Times reports, former President Donald Trump said Wednesday that if he runs in 2024, an official announcement will likely not happen until after the 2022 federal elections. And he said, quote, "If you do it, I think probably the most appropriate time would be right after the 2022 election." And folks, it's already 2021. It's right around the corner. He said, "That's my opinion. I could do it sooner, but I think right after the election would be good, especially if you have a good election." Trump said this during an interview on the Dan Bongino show, and he continued, quote, "Now, I'm not sure if you didn't have a good election. I'm not sure that," he said, "Now, I'm not sure if you didn't have a good election. I'm not sure that that wouldn't be good also, if you want to know the truth." And Trump said that he's giving another bid the most serious consideration. Again, deeply suggesting he's going to run again in 2024. And he noted that his polls and other information point to him doing well in the GOP field if he does launch another bid. And he said, quote, "I think we can have a great 22 and most likely right after that," he said. And so Trump's saying that he believes in 2022 we'll have a great 22, he's saying, suggesting that he does believe that, again, his push to have Republicans retake the House and the Senate has a good shot at it. And keep in mind, folks, they just did the census, and the census came out. California, New York lost seats. Many other states, including, for example, Texas, have gained seats. And quite a few Republican areas also gained seats. And so the chance of Republicans retaking the House in particular, just through the changes in the census, are actually quite high right now. We'll have to see what happens again. We'll have to see how things go over the next year. But very likely, this is all about to start very soon, folks. Very likely, we're going to see at least a very contentious race for 2022, and also expect the campaigning on that to start very soon as well. Again, 2022 is not far away. 2022 is right around the corner. We're already 2021. And again, you're going to see Trump getting behind a lot of candidates, pushing candidates, campaigning for candidates. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening, I think, in the public sphere very soon as that whole thing starts up. And so get ready. I've been saying maybe in 2 to 3 months, I'd say maybe about 2 months now, we can expect to start seeing some of this. Now, that said, on the other side of the coin, Biden has now up to $6 trillion in spending, which is about 4 times, I believe, the federal government, which is quite a lot of spending. And it's interesting now that he's getting pushback, not just from Republicans, but also from some Democrats as well. Pushing back against Biden on this has become somewhat of a bipartisan issue. Epoch Times reports President Joe Biden, $6 trillion in early term spending schemes. Early term, $6 trillion. This includes his $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that passed with 0 Republican votes, along with his proposed $2.3 trillion American Jobs Plan and $1.8 trillion American Families Plan, have drawn sharply critical reactions from Republicans and some muted criticism from Democrats for their lofty price tags, to say the least. It says here, Biden unveiled his newest legislative proposal, the sweeping $1.8 trillion package for families and education, during his first joint speech to Congress on Wednesday. And he called it a once-in-a-generation investment. How many once-in-a-generation investments have we had in the last 10 years, right? He says, once-in-a-generation investment that could bring lasting benefits to the economy, expand the middle class, and reduce child poverty, he's claiming. Now, the plan includes $1 trillion in spending on education and child care and $800 billion in tax credits aimed at middle and low-income families, funded mainly by tax hikes on wealthier Americans, i.e. wealth redistribution, i.e. the flattening of the economic system in the U.S. to some extent. And we'll have to see what the caps are in terms of who gets targeted by that. But folks, you could expect a lot of wealthy Americans to take a pretty big tax hike to pay for this $1.8 trillion spending package, not to mention the other ones. From Jeff Christensen, he said, Josh, when reading a quote, why do you not unquote? Maybe I should. It feels awkward. I tend to emphasize quotes when I do it. I could try unquote just so you know exactly where the quotes begin and end. I'll see what the reception is on it. Now, with this, of course, Republicans have been framing this as more like a socialist wish list. And even this plan, it really is wealth redistribution. And especially we have to see who it gives money to. We've seen, for example, in New York, that some of the spending plans are giving money to non-citizens, illegal immigrants in this case, up to $15,000 being given to non-U.S. citizens, people who are not only non-citizens, but who are in this country illegally. People who are breaking American law are getting $15,000, up to $15,000 in New York. It's unclear to see what happens, again, with Biden and how he does it, and whether that also means money for non-citizens, right? We'll have to see. It also has a lot to say about, if they're giving money for childcare and schools. I'm all for helping kids with schools. In my personal opinion, though, financing a broken system does not get rid of the problems with it. Financing a broken system tends to just subsidize the problems, right? If a system is failing, if an institution is failing, there's usually a reason for it. Throwing money at it does not actually fix those problems. It just subsidizes a failing system. This is why when you talk about, for example, schools and quality of education, in my opinion, right, you should really look at the causes of these things. Look at the causes of the problems within the education system. If they were to, for example, give school credits to parents, which is what Trump was pushing for, which enables school choice, which I think it's kind of a bipartisan issue, kind of, when you talk about school choice. But the way it was framed under Trump was this. They said, for example, if you were to give parents, say, a $20,000 credit, rather than, for example, giving a huge spending boost to public schools, which is the approach Biden's taking, if you were to instead give that money to parents and let them get a voucher that they can give to a private school or a charter school, that would create more competition within the education system. And ironically, the concern that was brought up with Trump's plan with the way to fix the broken school systems in America, Trump's plan was to again give parents school credits that they could use, these vouchers. That was criticized as something that would, lower the quality of education in the public school system or destroy them. Now, why would it destroy the public school if you were to let parents have a choice, right? Why would letting parents have a choice of which school they put their kids in destroy the public schools? Probably because they don't like what the public schools are doing. Probably because they think the public schools are a failing model, right? Otherwise, why would letting them choose their schools collapse that system? Now, does taking a failing system, a system that parents would very likely not support, were they actually given a choice, right? If kids could find a better school, or at least have competition for schools, would it be better for them to go to other schools, or would it be better to keep them in the public schools? If they believe, again, that letting kids actually have that choice, or letting parents have that choice, would destroy the public school system because people can actually choose where they go, probably there's something wrong with the public school system. The approach they're taking instead of that is to, again, give a huge amount of money to the public schools, which a lot of that is really probably going to go to supporting the migrant crisis we have right now, the border crisis, where we have a lot of unaccompanied kids coming across the border. They're going to need a whole lot more programs, not just to deal with the many new kids who are going to be filling our public schools, but also English as second language classes, also additional classes to help them catch up with their classmates. Also, other programs, typically areas where you have a lot of, let's say, unaccompanied minors coming across the border who have to go into the American school systems. They tend to eat up a lot of the budgets, and you have school overcrowding. A lot of the money for the schools is probably going to go to this. And so we'll have to see what he ends up using the money for. But folks, $6 trillion we're looking at in spending within the first few months of the Biden administration. And we'll have to see what they have next, because we'll have to see how many more blows the U.S. dollar can take, especially during a time when the Chinese Communist Party is waging currency warfare against the United States with their new digital currency. The timing to, for example, create inflation in the U.S. is not very well thought out. Now, on that note, the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor a reserve, but prints our money and also controls inflation and also controls interest rates in the United States, is lowering interest rates to zero. Favor that they often do for Biden or for Democrats. We saw under Obama they kept interest rates at zero for the most part. Under Trump, they raised interest rates pretty much as high as they could. It was like 3 or 4% at some points, I believe, and then lowered it again for Biden. Interest rates are again close to zero. Now, how does this work? Basically, the Federal Reserve can raise or lower interest rates as they see fit to basically balance out the budget, quote unquote, to prevent the value of the dollar from changing too much. Under Trump, you had really an economic boom. A lot of that money that Americans would have gotten was eaten up by the Federal Reserve because, again, they raised the interest rates. Typically what happens, right, with the interest rates is they raise them and you have a bust. A lot of economic crises happen in the U.S. when the Federal Reserve raises the interest rates, right? That oftentimes happens. And when they lower the interest rates, typically you see a boom. You typically see the economy do well. The Federal Reserve has a large control over this. Now they've lowered interest rates to zero while the Biden administration makes, again, $6 trillion planned in spending, about four times over our budget. Patriot Girl, you're asking, when was the Fed ever audited? They were pushing for it, but I don't think it actually ever went through. And to see what happens with it. The important point with this, though, is that if they're keeping interest rates close to zero right now, the amount of leeway they can give to the Biden administration, right? The amount of leeway they can give to the Biden administration before we start seeing inflation and before we start seeing blows taken to the U.S. dollar, they're pretty much already, right? They're pretty much already at the limit of how low they can push it, which means that if it goes anywhere beyond that, we're going to start seeing inflation. Any more beyond this, we're going to start seeing inflation. And maybe they'll do it anyways, we'll have to see. And the timing of this couldn't be worse because, again, right now you have China pushing this digital currency. And if the US dollar takes a hit right now and it starts affecting other countries, I guarantee you're going to see a lot of other countries start jumping on China's digital yuan because that's the way it's going with it. Now, folks, let's go to the next story, and then we'll go into some questions in just a bit. Next one we have here is, I'll talk about the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party is able to enforce some of its own censorship policies right here in the United States. And in California, you have a story on this just recently. It says here, Epoch Times reports, Anaheim commissioner removed after refusing to partner with Chinese city. It says here, it says an Anaheim City Council stripped a commissioner of his title for comments he made after refusing to partner with a Chinese city. It says the council unanimously voted to remove Larry Larson's commissioner status from the Sister Cities Commission during an April 27th City Council meeting. And he said this to the council. He said, they're going to destroy me and my reputation, kick me off sister cities, which you voted to put me on because I said China virus. Now, folks, what are they calling the virus variant that's spreading in India right now? What is it called again? Are they calling it the India variant? What were they calling the variant spreading in Africa? Weren't they calling it the Africa variant? What about the UK variant or the other variants that have come up? Why can we call these variants based on the country of origin names, but we can't call the Chinese Communist Party virus, the CCP virus, the China virus? Why is that considered controversial? Maybe it's because the Chinese Communist Party has been putting pressure on different officials. Maybe it's because the Chinese Communist Party is pulling strings here in the US to make it so you're not allowed to say that. Why is that considered controversial when we can call the India variant, and India is not threatening to pull out trade deals with the US and other countries? Why is India not threatening Australia, for example, on these types of things? Why is this considered controversial, right? Anyways, bizarre labeling and bizarre framing of what is controversial and what's not. Again, playing into the narratives of the Chinese Communist Party, which is trying to remove its affiliation with the virus when people are calling for investigations into the origin of the virus, which again, it rigged, right? The Chinese Communist Party rigged the investigations, partnered with the World Health Organization when they went over there to investigate, to the extent that even the Biden administration wasn't buying their conclusion on it. Yeah, and so anyways, wild times, folks. And yeah, as Phil Gowan said, yeah, being logical in an illogical world, such is life, right? Now, let's go into a couple more stories, and then we'll jump into some questions for the night. I want to start off here. Now, politicians are wrapped up in an effort to censor election posts. This happened during the 2020 elections. And we were talking before about how they fortified the election, right? The 2020 election was fortified by a large number of deep state organizations and individuals and wealthy billionaires and millionaires and media organizations and politicians. They fortified it for us. That way they could ensure that the person they wanted to win would win. They had to fortify the election. Now let's go into a new way that they fortified the election that is just now coming out. Epoch Times reports California officials and Biden-linked firm coordinated with big tech to censor election posts, according to Judicial Watch. Now this is important, folks, because going back to 2016, do you remember the main basis of the Trump-Russia allegations? First, they were trying to say that Russia hacked the DNC servers. It didn't come out, right? There was no evidence on that. It turned out that the company they hired, the company the DNC and the Clinton campaign hired to look at it, never actually passed the information to the FBI. The FBI never actually verified any of it. No evidence ever came out that the Russians were part of that hack. It looked like actually the evidence pointed towards an internal breach. And we're seeing now evidence that maybe someone might have been offed for, bringing that up. We'll have to see. Talked about in the last episode. But folks, basically the narrative that came out to try to say that Russia interfered with the election, if you actually read the documents that they were releasing, was they were saying that Russia Today, RT, was, again, supportive of Trump and against Hillary Clinton. And because Russia Today has some financing from the Russian government, then that means that the Russian government was trying to spread disinformation, right? Was trying to spread disinformation to basically rig the elections. Now, it wasn't very big, but now the evidence is coming out that in 2020, this is actually what California officials and a Biden-linked firm did in fact do with big tech, censoring election posts. Let's go into it. It says here, California officials colluded with big tech to censor social media posts in the United States during the 2020 presidential election. Government watchdog group Judicial Watch announced Tuesday. The findings come after Judicial Watch received 540 pages and a further 4 pages of documents from the Office of the Secretary of State of California in response to an open record request, the group said. It had filed the request after a December 2020 report surfaced revealing that California's Office of Election Cybersecurity had surveilled and asked these social media giants to remove or flag as misleading at least 24 messages. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton said that the SKD Knickerbocker, a communications company linked to President Joe Biden's election campaign, was involved in the censoring of speech during last year's election period. How do you have a campaign, a group linked to a campaign being involved with censorship during an election to, again, favor their outcome, right? Now, Going into this just a bit more, the company did this by sharing its, quote, misinformation daily briefings with California officials, who then passed them on to social media giants Facebook, Twitter, and Google for dissemination, according to Judicial Watch. And folks, ironically, the whole idea of misinformation and disinformation oftentimes uses misinformation and or disinformation. Misinformation being outright false information, a common practice by a lot of big media outlets these days. Disinformation being kind of like changing the footnotes of arguments, falsifying information, and then using the falsified information as footnotes within broader reports, which can then be cited for stories and so on. Or, for example, let's say presenting true information, but changing the narrative within it, drawing a false conclusion from otherwise accurate information and then using that as a footnote for additional arguments. Misinformation and disinformation, the way that people use it these days, ironically embodies what it claims to oppose. And a lot of these fighting disinformation groups very often promote disinformation themselves. And here we see that one of these groups was doing this, it seems, with the purpose of creating censorship specifically along a particular political interest during an election season tied to a campaign. Now, Judicial Watch said this. It says, as according to Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch, he said, these new documents suggest a conspiracy against the First Amendment rights of Americans by the California Secretary of State, the Biden campaign, and big tech. And he said these documents blow up the big lie that big tech censorship is private, as the documents show collusion between a whole group of government officials in multiple states to suppress speech about election controversies. So pretty big update, folks. Now, that said, let's jump into some questions, and then I'll go into some more stories. But first, folks, I've been saying for a while now that we're going to be launching something big, that we have something big in store, and that something big is Epoch TV, at epochtv.com. Quick update on this. I said before, again, it's $4.99 a month, the price of a California gallon of gas, right? Actually, I hear it's even higher than that now. $4.99 a month. Really, and folks, again, this supports us bringing accurate news, bringing uncensored news with a platform that cannot be censored. We're working to bring a whole bunch more shows on right now. You can find Crossroads there. Quite a few other shows there as well. We're looking on bringing on more right now. And folks, again, supporting us there supports everything we're doing, supports our mission to bring uncensored news. And I mentioned before that I think I said it was $1.99 extra. If you're already an Epoch Times subscriber, $1.99 extra gets you the subscription. Actually, cancel that. If you have an Epoch Times digital subscription, you automatically get Epoch TV for free. So if you have an Epoch Times digital subscription, you will get Epoch TV for free. Or you can choose to just get Epoch TV, epochtv.com, for $4.99 a month. And folks, let's show you a quick preview of that now.
I've been living my life from when I'm 11 years old, inside to the belly to the monster. In 1959, the revolution went. Castro was fascinated. He said, I want you to be the organizer for my army in the future. He pulled out his briefcase, pulled a weapon, gun. This is for you. You're going to be the commander, the supreme commander to my forces for the future. Che Guevara takes me this morning to the building where they're training all the people, the executives. They're going to take over not only the phone company, the electrical company, and they're not going to stop a country with Che Guevara until they take even the hot dog stand. If this happens, my father is going to lose everything he worked all his life. My father. And I say, oh my God, what we've been doing. I tell my uncle, I live in Cuba. I said, why you live in Cuba? Don't leave Cuba. Stay with us. We will train you, and you want to be the best, to the best that we have.
So who did your uncle work for?
I believe CIA, Mossad, everywhere, intelligence community. I come to be an intelligence source to the West. So powerful.
So that episode is going to be airing tomorrow, and that is with one of the former commander-in-chief of the youth military in Cuba, an individual who actually worked right alongside Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. It's an interesting interview. He's a great guy. He talks about his story of, again, what happened in Cuba during the revolution, some real information actually too about what was happening behind the scenes during the revolution, how people were duped into believing that Fidel Castro wasn't a communist. In fact, he refused to say that he was a communist. Also, some information on how the revolution started, how he was brought into this building, and they basically laid out the plan on how they were going to start taking over all the businesses in the country. Something important to note, because it's happening right now in other parts of the world. The Chinese Communist Party right now is working on a plan just like that, which we've discussed frequently, and I've been warning that they might try something like that here, so keep an eye out for it. He also has some very interesting information as well that we go into in that interview about how the Cuban regime works alongside the Chinese Communist parties to subvert the United States, including with the border crisis, including with the drug trade, including with terrorism, including with other things. It's a great interview. That'll be airing on Epoch TV tomorrow. That's epochtv.com. Now, folks, that said, let's jump into some questions for the night. Let's see here. From Zoe S., you said, how many of you agree that BLM seems to have taken over the advertising world? It does seem to be the case. This whole woke agenda is part of the whole way that people kind of absolve themselves of the inherent sin that they've been criticized of having. It's really bizarre, actually. It's really bizarre. I've had a few conversations on this, and basically here's how it works, because you're talking about, again, advertising companies seeming to have all been taken over by this BLM agenda, right? Basically, if you understand that this social justice movement functions like a religion, right, where they have their own creed, which you can show them any evidence you want, it doesn't make a difference, right? They still don't believe it. They can have their own creed, they have their own idea of original sin, right? The original sin being your race, the color of your skin, your class is what determines whether you're righteous or evil. Just like in religion, they talk about original sin, right? The question is then, how do you absolve yourself of original sin? Well, in most religions, you, again, ask for forgiveness, you repent or whatever, and then You can, again, work on yourself and be forgiven. Within the whole socialist system, repentance is this virtue signaling, right? Repentance for them is virtue signaling. They have to come out and apologize for the crimes of their race, their gender, their class, or whatever it is that they're, again, part of. They have to relinquish their beliefs, relinquish their values, whatever issue they're using for the current narrative, right? So they have to come out and do this. And then once they've relinquished it and they begin joining the side to attack the very thing that they were actually part of, like i.e. the millionaires and billionaires and big businesses ironically supporting the socialist agenda that is using the narrative of opposing millionaires and billionaires of big business, are some of the biggest promoters of the very thing that claims to be targeting them for destruction. Why is that? It's because by virtue signaling, by coming out and claiming, by siding against the very thing that they are, ironically, they can try to absolve themselves of sin within the social justice system, within the social justice moral system. They can absolve themselves of it. And by virtue signaling, they believe that they can get away from being attacked by it, right? It's a way of protecting themselves going forward to make sure that once the guillotine rolls around the street, that they're not ones targeted for it. It's the same way that you can have, for example, politicians, i.e. in some countries, having photos emerge of them wearing blackface, and people don't seem to even care because they virtue signal their way out of it. You can have, for example, politicians, i.e. top politicians maybe in the United States, who are friends with senators like Mr. Byrd, who was one of the leaders of the KKK, politicians in the U.S. who were like very close to the guy, who regarded him as a mentor, who aren't criticized for, again, praising people tied to the KKK, because, again, they virtue signal their way out of it. It's a way, again, of having this kind of, regardless of whether you actually represent what these people claim to oppose, you can virtue signal, right? Claim that you denounce the very thing that you were part of, whether it's your race, your gender, whether it's your class, whether it's anything they're targeting at any moment, your beliefs, your faith, anything. By attacking the very thing that you were part of and saying you're no longer identify with your race or this or that you can do anything you want pretty much after that, to the extent that you can violate any standard they claim to have, and they don't seem to care. Again, isn't Nike involved with slave labor in China? Right? Weren't they involved with slave labor in China? Aren't they involved with specifically slave labor targeting ethnic minorities in China? And meanwhile, they're here, shoving these social justice narratives down our throat, criticizing the history of this country. Why is it, again, these companies can embody the very thing they claim to oppose and not be criticized for it? It's because, again, once they get behind the narratives, actions no longer matter. They can violate the standards that they claim to represent any way they want, as long as they're criticizing the thing that they claim to oppose. Because the thing they oppose is just the puppet. The narrative is just the puppet. It's just the carrot on the string being used to lure the mule down the road. It does not actually represent what they care about. The goal is the social transformation. And as long as they're behind the goal of the social transformation, the narrative doesn't matter. And frankly, their actions don't matter, according to the folks who are part of this. They don't care that Nike is involved with slave labor. They don't care that a lot of the fabric industry is involved with slave labor. They don't care that companies are doing business in, again, China, where they're dealing with ethnic genocide, actual ethnic genocide, while at the same time trying to criticize things that happened, in the U.S. over 100 years ago, or even longer in some cases, based on the same narratives. The narrative means nothing to these people. And so that's why you see a lot of them advertising on this. It's their way of absolving themselves while giving themselves immunity of carrying it out as we speak, while at the same time supporting this agenda. And the agenda is what it's really about. Next question is from Anastasia Sagal. You said, "Hi, Josh. Do you know what is happening with Giuliani?" Let me get into that in just a bit. I'll be going into that. Yeah, and Molly John, you said also live organ harvesting. Yeah, you'd think that, again, repeating a genocide, live organ harvesting, something unthinkable, would be enough to make companies not want to do business with a genocidal regime that, again, tortures and kills people for their faith, that harvests their organs while they're still alive, to give transplants to the wealthy elites, including Communist Party officials, killing the underclass for the sake of the elites, would somehow be controversial for these big companies. But again, we see how hollow these narratives are when we point to this, right? Anyways, you're asking about Giuliani, though. Let me jump into that because I have a story when I go into that. But I'll go over this real quick for your question. Epoch Times actually has a story in this. Giuliani's lawyers accusing the Department of Justice of corrupt double standards in executing warrants against him. Basically, here's what happened. I'll go into the story. It says, Rudy Giuliani's attorney accused the Department of Justice of a corrupt double standard by executing warrants against Giuliani on suspicion of failing to register as a foreign agent while allegedly ignoring clear evidence on a laptop purporting to belong to Hunter Biden that would support similar allegations in a probe. In other words, they raided Giuliani's office and they took several of his electronic devices, claiming that they did it because of a suspicion, right? Suspicion that he failed to register as a foreign agent. While, again, Hunter Biden himself has similar allegations against him, again, that he failed to register as a foreign agent, including actual writings on his documents saying that, suggesting that they may have to register as foreign agents. But again, they don't do pre-dawn raids on Hunter Biden, right? Remember, folks, how they did these pre-dawn raids against Roger Stone? How they had like the Special Forces mailmen, right? The Postal Service go and grab Steve Bannon off a yacht because they believed that he was improperly using funds on a crowdfunding plan to build a border wall. Why are they not holding the same standards to the other side of the political spectrum? Why is it only one side that has really severe overuse of enforcement? And some could argue, again, pre-dawn raids for what are not major crimes, again, using in a very strange way, like the special forces of the post office to arrest someone for something that nobody's ever charged with normally, like misusing funds from a crowdfunding platform. And again, going after Giuliani himself on something that, again, you could go after Hunter Biden for, and there were reports in this early on suggesting that this was a problem, and nobody seems to care about it, at least on the, again, when it comes to the Department of Justice. Why do we have these double standards, right? Maybe it's because our political system is selectively using the systems of justice. Your guess is as good as mine, but it does seem to be the case that there's a double standard on how these systems of justice are being used in this country, and a lot of that does seem to have a strong political bias. That, again, rules for thee and not for me, right? Your big daddy, you said, what about Ashley Babbitt lawsuit? Okay, so Ashley Babbitt was the woman who was shot and killed at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. A couple updates on that. Now, folks, how many of you remember hearing stories about those angry Trump supporters who sieged the Capitol building and 5 people were killed? And again, they beat an officer to death with a fire extinguisher, they said. And again, a woman, they were, just violence all over the place. Well, the whole story in this is actually coming out now. First off, the officer who was killed was not actually killed. The officer died of natural causes, and the media lied to you about that. The entire narrative was fake. They were lying to you about that. Not only did they lie to you about it, but they tried to suppress the information from being released. It was fake. He was not killed by Trump supporters. The story on that has come out now. Information on that has come out now. They lied to you. Ashley Babbitt was the only person who was killed. The other 3 people died of natural causes like heart attacks and so on. Not again, actions of other individuals, not caused by violence. So the violence was a lie, at least when it comes to serious violence. The violence was a lie. They lied to you about it. The real act of violence was done at the hands of the Capitol Police. arguably using severely unnecessary force, because you had this woman, Ashley Babbitt, climb through a window that had been broken by some very suspicious individuals, while you had at least 6 officers, 5 to 6 officers, standing right next to her, including at least 3 with long guns, with rifles, who could have easily pulled her back and stopped her. But an officer on the other side, a Capitol Police officer, decided to shoot her almost point blank in the head or in the neck, which killed her. And the family is now pressing charges against them. Now, what happened to that officer? Nothing. In fact, the Democrats have been talking about giving that officer an award, while at the same time going after police officers across the country, even for what appear to be very justified shootings, including preventing the stabbing of someone. Bizarre world, folks, right? Double standards across the board. Again, seeming to be very closely aligned to political agendas, political narratives, and political parties. The family of Ashley Babbitt, however, is talking about suing the Capitol Police. And there's no updates in terms of that moving forward, other than them announcing they're going to do it. So we'll have to see what happens with that. I will be keeping you updated on that. This is from 111 Robin. He said, hey Joshua, what's going on with the Arizona audit? The Arizona audit is continuing. It's currently on track. They tried blocking it, including with the temporary restraining order, including through other means. None of those were able to stop it. They're on track on finishing by deadline. We'll have to see what happens. You did have one of the judges, a Republican-appointed judge, step down, and a Democrat-appointed judge take over. We'll have to see, again, the integrity of it. We'll see what comes out from it. But it is moving along according to plan. According to the scheduled plan, Democrats have tried blocking it several times. They've criticized it quite a bit. They tried launching a probe into the Republicans who launched the investigation. The probe was denied because of lack of evidence to justify it. And currently, it's just moving forward. We'll have to see what comes out from it. I will keep you all updated on that as we get more information. This is from Candace Perkins. He said, Josh, have you looked into the ESG scores that big banks are assigning to businesses that will control future funding? I have not looked into that, but I will make a note of that. Yeah, thank you for letting me know. Okay. Next question is from Sheila Marie. Said, Joshua, happy to see your last Q&A with over 100,000 views. Yeah, it was nice. You said, we share it so much, even before your live stream starts. I appreciate it. And actually, folks, on that note, it does seem quite a few channels. Sorry. It does seem quite a few channels of the Epoch Times and NTD, our sister media, are basically frozen on YouTube. Our subscriptions actually, on Crossroads, these subscriptions were really rising really fast. The rate we were growing for a while, it was looking like we were gonna get 100,000 subscriptions every 2 months, maybe even faster than that. And then suddenly it just froze, just stopped where it's at, and it really hasn't changed much since then. And a few of our channels simultaneously had almost the exact same thing happen, which leads us to believe that, again, given the also removal of our ads around the same time, that maybe something happened behind the scenes, which is making us think that, again, the show is being suppressed. We know for a fact it's being demonetized, but also possibly being suppressed. And now that said, it's up to folks like you to help us get the word out if you can. And really appreciate you folks if you share this video, tell people about Crossroads, and especially right now, help us promote Epoch TV, epochtv.com, because Epoch TV is our way of creating a platform they can't censor. And really, if we can get you folks who are watching the show here on Epoch TV, really this gives us a lot more freedom in terms of what we can say. It gives us a lot more freedom to, again, create quality programming, get more shows on, and so on. Really grow it, because every little bit we get really helps us move forward with the whole idea we have, the whole hope we have of creating a very large and very positive free speech platform when it comes to the ability to report the news, because a lot of news is being suppressed here in the United States. There's a lot of keywords you can't say on YouTube because they will delete or block your channel. For example, there's a lot of stuff you can't even put on YouTube without getting a strike against you. Even stuff that's not really technically controversial, they block on here. I mean, for example, Trump's speech at CPAC. If any channel that had published Trump's speech at CPAC on YouTube got a strike. They were giving people strikes for having for publishing Trump's video. And I mean, this is again, like, former president of the United States, possible front runner for 2024, and they're not even allowing him to again have a video on their own platform. Going forward, again, folks, Epoch TV is where it's at. So if you could support us there, please check it out. Let's see here. Now, folks, let's go into a few more stories for the night because it's getting late and I want to go over a few more stories. Now, first of all here, right? Now, I want to talk about some of the pushback to critical race theory because this is happening now across the United States in a few different areas. A few updates on this. Now, first of all, New Hampshire is holding a rally urging schools to stop critical race theory indoctrination. Now, the interesting thing about this is just one example of it. The interesting thing about this is that there are a lot of rallies like this taking place across the country. You have parents right now standing up against what's being taught in the schools. In New York, for example, there was an open letter published by a parent that went viral, criticizing what's happening again at the schools, where they're pushing this critical race theory agenda. California as well, you've had parents standing up, other places parents standing up. And really, it seems to be the case that it's parents getting together and pressing the schools to change what they're doing, right, to stop pushing this on their kids, that's going to start making a difference. Epoch Times reports this. It says, more than 200 people rallied at the New Hampshire State House on April 24th to urge schools to stop indoctrinating children with critical race theory, or CRT, which was described by demonstrators as a set of divisive concepts aimed at increasing racial tensions. Ironically, right, it claims to be something that promotes tolerance, but really demonizes people based on the color of their skin, in this case, mostly white people. Right? Demonizes people because of the color of their skin, promotes hatred of a certain race, promotes hatred of a certain culture, and even the canceling of American culture in particular. Now, folks, the important thing to note here is this is not just the United States where they've done this. I have friends in Brazil have told me they did the exact same thing in Brazil. Alando Santos with Terce Livre, one of my friends. They did this. He'd been saying they did the same thing in Brazil. Brazil is a Latin American country. They're Portuguese. They have people from many different countries there. But again, the narrative the socialists used to push their agendas there was very similar, tearing down statues, criticizing the country's founding, and dividing people according to their race. They did this in many other Latin American countries, ironically, because we tend to think of Latin American as a race in and of itself. Whereas in reality, the racial mix in a lot of these countries isn't that much different from the United States. You have Europeans, you have natives, you have blacks who are brought over, right? You have Asians, different races. These countries have very similar race mixes to the United States, and they use the exact same narratives in these countries to push this agenda. This is not new. The idea of attacking the cultural stories of a society in order to hold a revolution. This is what they did in China during the Cultural Revolution, where they tore down statues. They had the destruction of what they called the four olds, old beliefs, old culture, and so on, right? Destroying the traditions, destroying the beliefs, destroying the founding stories of the country, and making that seem like something evil. They did the same thing in China. They did the same thing in the Soviet Union. Alexander Solzhenitsyn noted this when he talked about with his famous quote, right, where he said, "Why did this happen? It's because we forgot God." The other part of that quote is where he talks about how kids are being indoctrinated to hate their own country, to hate their own founding stories, to hate their own culture. That is what's being promoted in the United States. under the guise of race, a campaign to promote hatred for your own culture. All right? And a way to destroy, again, the founding stories of this country to replace it with something new. And the way this has been done in other countries, typically that something new is a socialist system, right? A reinterpretation of everything, this cult of man, this cult of reason, under this socialist idea. Now, critical race theory has been kind of the Trojan horse here in the U.S. because race is a sensitive issue in the U.S. And they're using this to promote racial tensions in order to use that as a narrative to drive forward this agenda. Now, it says here, a new proposed rule by the U.S. Department of Education in April suggested including critical race theory in history and civics classrooms throughout the country. Now, the protesters had signs such as Teach MLK, Martin Luther King, not CRT, critical race theory. Now, the theoretical framework of CRT are rooted in critical theory, a Marxist social philosophy, which argues that social problems are created more by societal structures and cultural assumptions than by individual factors. CRT incorporates the notion that the white race enjoys certain privileges just because of its skin color, i.e. the promotion of racial discrimination, ironically under the guise of a system to oppose racial discrimination. Now, on that note, Idaho, a bit more on what's happening, Idaho's Senate has voted to ban teaching of critical race theory in public classrooms. And folks, I've been mentioning how states are states are pushing back against what the federal government's doing right now. And they're looking at what different states are doing that is working. For example, the gun sanctuary states, which are now spreading state to state. You see a lot of them getting behind it, right? We see a lot of them getting behind it. The same thing's going to happen in other areas. And now that Idaho is banning, or at least passed in the Senate, working to ban the teaching of critical race theory in public schools, you can expect other states to duplicate this effort. It says here, the Idaho Senate approved a proposal on April 26 to prevent the teaching of critical race theory in the GEM states' public schools and universities. Now, the measure, which is H377, was passed largely along party lines in a 27-8 vote. One Republican, Senator Dan Johnson, joined Democrats in opposing the bill. The legislation now heads to Republican Governor Brad Little's desk. So it's heading to a Republican desk. Let's see if Governor Brad Little passes it. And again, the state's House has also approved it already. The bill mandates that no public school, quote, shall direct or otherwise compel students to personally affirm, adopt, or adhere to, end quote, critical race theory or similar tenets such as, quote, that individuals by virtue of sex, race, ethnicity, religion, color, or national origin are inherently responsible for actions committed in the past by other members of the same sex, race, ethnicity, religion, color, or national origin. In other words, folks, they're making it illegal technically. This public schools can't teach it. To try to accuse students of inherently being evil because of their gender, because of their race, because of their ethnicity, because of their religion, because of their national origin, and so on. Ironically, something that you would think would be promoted is generally opposing discrimination. But again, the irony of communist ideas is typically communist narratives embody the very thing they claim to oppose, right? Typically, folks, it's the racists who claim to get behind the anti-racist agenda. Typically, it's the fascists who get behind the anti-fascist agenda. Typically, folks, it's the people who claim to oppose the millionaires and billionaires who are being led by the millionaires and billionaires pushing for their agenda. A lot of these narratives oftentimes embody the very thing they claim to hate. And critical race theory ironically embodies discrimination based, again, on trying to frame people as being inherently guilty of things they had nothing to do with solely because of their race, their gender, their national origin, or otherwise. This is discrimination under the guise of fighting discrimination. And we now see states pushing back against it. Yeah, so folks, we'll have to see what happens going forward. I will keep you all updated on this. Jay Tay said, "Hey Josh, can't you do live stream on Epoch TV so we don't have to come to this dumpster platform?" We're working on it. We'll have to see. I was told maybe within a week we'll have live video function on Epoch TV. It's in the works, and hopefully soon we'll have it. But we're also planning to keep YouTube, at least until they kick us off or something. We'll have to see what they end up doing. But we are planning to stay on YouTube for as long as we're allowed. So hopefully we will be able to stay here, because there are people here who may not want to subscribe, although it does help us quite a bit. But we'll stay here as long as we can. And again, we're going to have a lot of exclusive features in Epoch TV. And so, folks, again, if you really want to support us, please join us in Epoch TV, epochtv.com. If you want to go the extra mile, please tell a friend or family member about it. Help us get the word out. It really helps us. All right, folks, that said, it's getting late, so I'll call it a night. But always a pleasure. That said as well, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.
This is revolutionary. This is Maoist. What Biden is doing is using race as a way of breaking down the existing power structures in the military. What they want to create is a military that is loyal to the new regime, that is loyal to the new socialist America. There's two purposes: A, to create a force that's loyal to a socialist America, and B, to so weaken the military that we can no longer stand up to China and Russia and play people like that. So with the police, they're doing the same thing. That's what I would do if I was a revolutionary. If Lenin was in the White House right now, or Mao Zedong was in the White House right now, that's what they would be doing.